Okay, welcome back to Biology in Focus. Today we're going to work on Chapter 40, Population Ecology and the Distribution of Organisms. This lecture is pretty long. It's almost 200 slides, and there are some interesting concepts here. If you get stuck on any of the concepts, I refer you to the video study guide on your Blackboard site. There should be information there that can help you with any of the questions that you have. You can always get in touch with me. My name is Mr. Sparks, and this is a lecture for John Tyler Community College. Okay, ecology is the scientific study of interactions between organisms and the environment. It's a very broad study. It includes a lot of different topics, a lot of different species, and a lot of different aspects of the environment. These interactions determine the distribution of the organisms and their abundance, and modern ecology includes observation and experimentation. Okay, so some of the ecological studies are done in the lab, and but most are done in the field. They try to understand biological interactions in the field. Okay, the rediscovery of nearly indistinct harlequin toad in Costa Rica raises many ecological questions. What are the environmental factors that limit their geographic distribution, and what factors, food or pathogens, biotic factors, affect their population size? So the harlequin toad was thought to be extinct in Costa Rica and Panama. And recently, in the 1990s, it was rediscovered, and it was found to be harboring a disease-causing fungus known as the chytrid fungus, and it's a fungus that's implicated in amphibian decline worldwide. Why was this fungus suddenly thriving in the rainforest? There were people suspected that it's because of cloudier days and warmer nights, and there were different aspects of this of the ecology that you had to consider in order to understand what was affecting the distribution of this species. There are 6 different levels of ecology labeled here. They include global ecology, landscape ecology, ecosystem ecology, community ecology, population ecology, and organismal ecology. So that goes from the kind of the broad scale down to the fine scale, down to the individual species. So, and individuals within that population. Global ecology is concerned with the biosphere, or the global ecosystem, which is the sum of all the planet's ecosystems. Global ecology examines the influence of energy and materials on organisms across the biosphere. So global ecology is concerned with like the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle, and the influence of sunlight on the planet, and how the tilt of the axis of the Earth affects the seasons on the planet. These are all aspects of global ecology. The biosphere is the global system, the sum of the planet's ecosystems and landscapes. Global ecology examines how the regional exchange of energy and materials influences the functioning and distribution of organisms across the biosphere. Okay, so for example, how does ocean circulation affect the global distribution of crustaceans? Global ecology considers the whole biosphere, the entire planet. Landscape ecology focuses on the exchanges of energy, material, and organisms across multiple ecosystems. A landscape or seascape is a mosaic of interconnected ecosystems. So these are considerations of how the river system might affect the riparian environment right near the river system, or the delta that is created by it. So entire landscapes, the mountains, how do the creeks in the mountains bring nutrients down to the larger rivers in the aquatic ecosystem that they affect. So a landscape or seascape is a mosaic of connected ecosystems. Research in landscape ecology focuses on factors controlling exchanges of energy, materials, and organisms across multiple ecosystems. To what extent do the trees lining a river serve as corridors for dispersal for animals? The trees that line a river are considered to be the riparian environment. Anything that is it borders the river systems immediately is known as the riparian environment. And these, as you probably know, if you've been to Richmond, Virginia, or I'm not sure what the James River is not too far from Midlothian, but the wooded areas surrounding the river are ways for the wildlife to travel from one place to another. Ecosystem ecology emphasizes the energy flow and chemical cycling among various biotic and abiotic components. An ecosystem is the community of organisms in an area and the physical factors by which they interact. Okay, so landscape ecology considers multiple ecosystems. Ecosystem ecology focuses on the individual ecosystems. An ecosystem, here's a prairie ecosystem with bison, which are the dominant mammals on the prairie ecosystem. Prairie ecosystems also have predators like mountain lions and grizzly bears, but bison are pretty much the most impressive animals. They crop the grasses short and maintain the ecosystem quality there by spreading their feces around and fertilizing the landscape. An ecosystem is a community of organisms in an area and the physical features with which those organisms interact. Ecosystem ecology emphasizes energy flow and chemical cycling between organisms and the environment. What factors control photosynthetic productivity in the temperate grassland ecology? Okay, community ecology is on a smaller scale yet. It deals with the whole array of interacting species within a community. A community is a group of populations of different species in an area. So, for example, this rainforest area here. A community is a group of populations of different species in an area. Community ecology examines how interactions between species such as predation, competition, affect community structure, and organization. What factors influence the diversity of species that make up a forest? Well, there's different animals that eat these different types of plants, and there's shading from the trees. Only trees that can grow or plants that can grow in shaded areas will grow in that understory of those tree forests, and the nutrients that are cycled through this forest. There may be there's carbon that's locked up in the trees as they grow, nitrogen that flows through the system and through the waterways, and gets released to the plants on the banks of the creek there. There's all kinds of different aspects that influence diversity in a community ecology. Population ecology focuses on factors affecting population size over time. A population is a group of individuals of the same species living in an area. Okay, so what affects these flamingos? A population is a large group of individuals of the same species living in an area. Population ecology analyzes factors that affect population size and how and why it changes through times. What environmental factors are affecting the reproductive rate of the flamingos? Well, flamingos are affected by predation. They are preyed on by in Africa. They're preyed on by baboons and and other animals that try to eat them. They also have a limitation in the amount of food that they can get. They feed on shrimp that live in briny ponds around in their habitat. So if they can, the color of the flamingo is said to be pink because of the color of the crustaceans that it eats. And organismal ecology studies how a organism's structure, physiology, and for animals, behavior meet environmental challenges. Organismal ecology includes physiological, evolutionary, and behavioral ecology. Organismal ecology, which includes the subdisciplines of physiological, evolutionary, and behavioral ecology, is concerned with how an organism's structure, physiology, and behavior meet the challenges posed by its environment. How does the hammerhead shark select a mate? I don't know. That's a good question. Hammerhead sharks are interesting animals. They have the eyes occur on the stalks on the either side of their head. And this is said to give them some advantage when they approach a school of fish. But they are and one of the most strangest looking animals on the planet. Okay, now Earth's climate influences the structure and distribution of its terrestrial biomes. The long-term prevailing weather conditions in an area constitute its climate. In fact, climate can be said to be those factors which affect the predominant vegetation in an area. Four major abiotic components of climate are temperature, precipitation, sunlight, and wind. So you can determine what you can describe a climate based on the vegetation. So the desert climate in the Sahara Desert in northern Africa is described by a distinct lack of vegetation. It's a very dry environment. The wet environment in the tropical rainforest is characterized by large trees and lots of vegetation. Okay, abiotic factors are the non-living chemical attributes of the environment. This is like sunlight and rain and wind. And biotic factors are the other organisms that make up the living component of the environment. This could be predators or competitors or prey or diseases. Different living factors that make up the environment. Macroclimate consists of patterns on the global, regional, and landscape scale. Global climate patterns are determined largely by solar energy and the planet's movement in space. The warming effect of the sun causes temperature variations, which drive evaporation and circulation of air and water. This causes latitudinal variations in climate. Okay, latitudinal variations in sunlight intensity is caused by the curved shape of the Earth. The sunlight strikes the tropics, which is the regions between 23.5 north and 23.5 degrees south latitude. It strikes most directly. At higher latitudes, where the sunlight strikes the Earth at an oblique angle, the light is more diffuse. Okay, so that's why it's colder at the poles. Now, here's a diagram that shows latitudinal variation in sunlight intensity. Okay, everybody knows about the solstice and the equinox. When we have winter solstice, that means the sun is directly overhead the Tropic of Capricorn. So winter solstice for us is summer solstice in the southern hemisphere. So it's the longest day of the year in the northern hemisphere here. It's the shortest day of the year in the southern hemisphere here. There's a great video about this on your video study guide by the Kurdistan Planetarium. It shows this concept in greater detail, and I urge you to go to your video study guide and find that that video and check it out. Okay, so during the equinoxes, which is in the summer and the vernal, during the spring and the fall, the sun is directly overhead the equator, and then during the summer solstice, the sun is directly overhead the Tropic of Cancer, and so this is why it's warmer in the summertime, because the sun, that what's happening here is actually the Earth is tilting on its axis as it goes around the sun. I think I'm getting you a little confused here, so I want you to go check out that video. Okay, global air circulation and precipitation patterns are initiated by intense solar radiation near the equator. Warm, wet air rising near the equator creates precipitation in the tropics, and dry air descending at 30 degrees north and south latitudes causes desert conditions. This pattern of precipitation and drying is repeated at the 60 degree north and 60 degree south latitudes and the poles. Okay, so the predominant winds are called the trade winds and the westerlies. Basically, what's happening here is this is what's known as a Hadley cell, and it's a cell which brings warm air, which collects moisture. Warm air collects moisture, and that as it rises towards the equator, it heats up, and as the warm air rises, it cools, and as it cools, it relinquishes its precipitation, and that causes major rain events. So that's why generally at the equator there are rainforests, because of this the rising of the warm air here, and the ascending moist air releases its moisture, and then it gets dried out, and it goes up towards 30 degrees north. Okay, this is like sort of near that Tropic of Capricorn area, and then as it cools, it descends, and it is cold, dry air, and this cold, dry air picks up moisture from the desert regions. So it picks up moisture from the desert regions and transports it to the tropical rainforest regions, and that's how that global air circulation pattern works. Okay, variation in the speed of Earth's rotation at different latitudes results in major wind patterns. Trade winds blow east to west in the tropics, and the westerlies blow west to east in the temperate zones. Okay, so here are the Hadley cells here, and this is called the Ferrel cell, and this is another cell in the Arctic. Okay, you can see these are schematic diagrams, and they're generalized. There's of course differences that occur over through the variation on the Earth's surface and the different wind patterns. We're not always having northeast trade winds. Sometimes we have hurricanes and other storms that stir this whole atmosphere up, and so things change around here. Here's the main cells that are operating, these Hadley cells, and then they're drawing that moisture up and then depositing it here along the areas of the tropical rainforests. Okay, so global air circulation and precipitation patterns. Oh, here we're going into it in a little bit greater detail here. Okay, so basically I've described to you what's going on here. Regional effects on climate. Climate is affected by seasonality, large bodies of water, and mountains. So the shape of the surface of the Earth can affect the wind patterns, and those wind patterns can cause warm air to be pushed up high and cool down, and as they cool, they relinquish their rain on one side of the mountains, and on the other side of the mountains, they may have no rain, and so they have what's called a rain shadow, where a desert may occur. Seasonal variations of light and temperature increase steadily towards the poles. Seasonality at the high latitudes is caused by the tilt of the Earth's axis of rotation and its annual passage around the sun. Belts of wet and dry air straddling the equator shift throughout the year with the changing angle of the sun. Changing wind patterns affect ocean currents. Okay, so here is the seasonal variation in sunlight intensity. Because the Earth is tilted on its axis relative to the plane of orbit around the sun, the intensity of the solar radiation varies seasonally. This variation is smallest in the tropics and increases towards the poles. So basically, here's the equinox. The sun is directly over the equator here, and here during the solstice, the December solstice, this is what I was telling you before. The sun is striking at a more direct angle. Its rays are striking the Tropic of Capricorn. During the June solstice, they're striking the Tropic of Cancer. This is when we have our summer, and this is when we have our winter. And then the opposite is true for the other side of the equator. So this December solstice is when they have is when the south of the equator has their summer, and June solstice is when the south of the equator has their winter. Okay, and then on the equinox, it's the axis of the Earth is such that it's basically equal. Equinox means equal. Equal night is what it means. Nox means night. So equinox means the equal night. This is when we have 12-hour days and 12-hour nights. Oceans and their currents and large lakes moderate the climate of nearby terrestrial environments. The California current, it carries cold water southward along the North America, and the Gulf Stream carries warm water from the equator to the North Atlantic. Okay, so here's the California current. It brings cold water down along the coast of California. This keeps it in the San Francisco area and up in the Marin and Humboldt area. All this area here is a nice, moist, temperate rainforest. And then it brings that cold water down into the ocean here. What's interesting is the Gulf Stream that comes up from the equator along the coast of North America here. It keeps our climate warmer than it would be without it. If it weren't for this Gulf Stream, we'd have a much colder winters. That Gulf Stream brings nice warm air up that's laden with moisture and keeps our climate nice and wet, so we have good forests and good climate for growing our crops. The Gulf Stream then actually goes up into Europe and affects England and France and the Scandinavia. And these places, England has a nice maritime climate. It stays, you can see it's actually on the same latitude as Newfoundland and parts of Canada, but it has a much milder climate because of the Gulf Stream warm effect. During the day, air rises over warm land and draws a cool breeze from the water across the land. As the land cools at night, air rises over the warmer water and draws cooler air from land back over the water, which is replaced by warmer air from onshore. So this constant flow maintains air quality in a way over these different areas. So it keeps that air mixed up, and it keeps a flow of precipitation in that area. So here is the cool flare. There's this cool airflow here to the left of the screen. Flows inland from the water, moderating the temperatures near the shore. And as it rises up the mountain range, this could be in the Pacific, or it could be in our mountains are much smaller here in the east. But this air encounters the mountains, it flows upwards, and as it cools at these higher altitudes, it releases water as rain and snow. And then that water is kind of like squeezed out of it, like you squeeze a washcloth or a sponge, and that less moisture is left on the air reaching the leeward side, and that is therefore has little precipitation. This rain shadow can create a desert on the backside of the mountain range. Okay, so this is what I was talking to you about earlier in the lecture. We were talking about the rain shadow. So this is looks like to me this is California. This might be the San Joaquin Valley here with lots of agriculture, and then that air is being brought over. We're getting some rain here on this side, and we've got good vegetation. This also happens like on in the Himalayan mountains. Those trade winds blow up over the Himalayan mountains, and then on the other side of the Himalayan mountains there are the Gobi Desert, and in California, this is on the leeward side of the mountains is the Nevada Desert. So rising air releases moisture on the windward side of the peak and creates a rain shadow as it just absorbs moisture in the leeward side. Many deserts are found in the rain shadow of mountains. Mountains affect the amount of sunlight reaching an area. In a northern hemisphere, south-facing slopes receive more sunlight than north-facing slopes. Every 1,000 meter increase in elevation produces a temperature drop of approximately 6 degrees Celsius. So topography has a great deal to do with climate. Climate and terrestrial biomes. Biomes are the major life zones created by vegetation types. Terrestrial biomes or physical environment like the aquatic biomes. Climate is very important in determining why terrestrial biomes are found in certain areas. Climate affects the latitudinal patterns of terrestrial biomes. Okay, so climate determines biomes. That's what I've been telling you earlier. Okay, here are the major biomes, distribution of major terrestrial biomes. Although biomes are mapped here with sharp boundaries, biomes actually grade into one another and sometimes over large areas. So here you can see some of these colors are similar to one another. But let's start with the tropical forests. Okay, we've got the tropical forests in the along the equator. Remember, our Hadley cells are dumping precipitation in this area and keeping it nice and moist. Savanna habitats are like typically what you see in Africa with cheetahs and giraffes. Those are good savanna habitats. Deserts like the Sahara Desert or the Nevada Desert and Utah Desert and northern Mexico Desert out in North America. Chaparral is areas that include that's like on the coast, the dry part of the coast between the temperate rainforests and the dry savanna the desert habitats. There is a habitat called a biome called the chaparral, and that is indicated by lots of a specific type of oak tree called live oaks. Chaparrals also occur along this Mediterranean region. It's the area that's really good for growing olives and wine in. That's the chaparral habitat, chaparral biome. There's temperate grasslands. These are large areas like in the central part of the United States. This is the prairie region. The temperate broadleaf forest. You should be familiar with the temperate broadleaf forest. This is our biome. This is the biome that's characterized by maples and oak trees and all of the vegetation that grow in the understory there. This is our home biome, the temperate broadleaf forest. Then there's the northern coniferous forest, which is the largest biome in the world. It's also known as the taiga. It's got spruce trees and fir trees, and it stretches across the world. It's typically in a very cold habitat, so there's not a lot of human cities and whatnot that occur in that area. It's characterized by the area around Siberia. Okay, so the Siberian area. There are tundras which occur in latitudes north of that. The tundras are they're characterized by lacking any sort of trees. They may have some small shrubs, but generally their vegetation consists of lichens and grasses. So they're very extreme environment up here in the tundra region. High mountains, they can include like the Rocky Mountains over in the western part of North America, the Andes in South America, or the Himalayan mountains in India. And then there's, of course, the polar ice. So we've got polar ice in Greenland and polar ice all over Antarctica. This is a very extreme habitat. Polar ice in Antarctica is where you have you will have your penguins and whatnot and seals down here in Antarctica, and then in polar ice region up in northern part, that's where you have your polar bears. Okay, a climograph plots the temperature and precipitation in a region. Biomes are affected not just by average temperature and precipitation, but also by the pattern of temperature and precipitation through the year. So these are aspects of the climate. Here's the climograph. A climograph for some major types of biomes in North America. This is just for North America. The areas plotted here encompasses ranges of annual mean temperature and precipitation in the biomes. Okay, these show these different climate. You've got precipitation. Let's look at the temperate broadleaf forest. That's our biome. Precipitation between say 50 and 250 centimeters per year, and the annual mean temperature of between 14 and 28 degrees Celsius. All right, so between this temperature parameter and between these mean precipitation parameter, that's where you've got your temperate broadleaf forest. And then a little bit colder than that, you've got your northern coniferous forest. And then colder than that area with less precipitation, you get the Arctic and alpine tundra. Okay, less precipitation, you go on the less precipitation area of the climograph, and you find deserts. And then a little warmer than that with a little more temperature, a little more precipitation, then you get the temperate grasslands. So you see how this climograph works. Basically, it shows us precipitation and temperature and plots out where we find those different types of uh, of habitats. Okay, natural and human-caused disturbances alter the distribution of biomes. A disturbance is an event that changes a community by removing organisms or altering resource availability. For example, frequent fires kill woody plants and prevent woodlands from establishing. This kind of disturbance is common in savannas and chaparral and prairies. These are all areas that have high degree of fire frequency, and they basically they burn off the woody shrubs and trees. Terrestrial biomes are often named for major physical or climatic factors and for vegetation. Terrestrial biomes usually grade into each other without sharp boundaries. The area of intergradation is called an ecotone and may be wide or narrow. So these biomes, terrestrial biomes or ecosystems, when the ecosystems blend into one another, they become an ecotone. There's an ecotone. Ecotones are easy to see if you look at the edge of a forest and a field, like some farmer may be growing a field for wheat, and then you'll see like some small shrubs in between the wheat field and the tall forest tree. That can be considered an ecotone as well. Vertical layering is an important feature of terrestrial biomes, and in a forest it might consist of an upper canopy, a lower tree layer, a shrub understory, a ground layer of herbaceous plants, forest floor, and root layer. Layering of vegetation provides diverse habitats for animals. So this type of layering of vegetation can cause competition for sunlight by different trees in that area, and then the understory plants may compete for available sunlight underneath those canopies. Terrestrial biomes can be characterized by distribution, precipitation, temperature, plants, and animals. Okay, so all these are characteristics of these different biomes, but they are caused by climatic factors. Precipitation and temperature, chief among them. Tropical forests occur in equatorial and subequatorial regions. Temperature is high year-round, 25 to 29 degrees Celsius. It's usually around like 90, 100 degrees Fahrenheit with little seasonal variation. In tropical rainforests, rainfall is relatively constant, while in tropical dry forests, precipitation is highly seasonal. Here's a tropical rainforest in Costa Rica. Okay, there's some different things they want us to consider here. The climate is pretty stable. It's very warm. It's right on the equator. It's get constant solar radiation. There are tropical dry forests as well, which have lower precipitation. Tropical rainforests are vertically layered, and the plants compete strongly for light. Broadleaf evergreen trees are dominant in rainforests, where many forest trees drop their leaves during the dry season. Okay, so tropical rainforests are home to millions of animal species, including an estimated 5 to 30 million still undescribed species of insects, spiders, and other arthropods. Animal diversity is higher than in any other terrestrial biome. The animals are adapted to vertically layered environment are often inconspicuous. Human beings have long ago established thriving communities in tropical rainforests. Rapid population growth is leading to agriculture and development and is now destroying many tropical rainforests. Okay, it's actually in the past, perhaps 1,000 years ago, even in the Amazon region, there was a thriving civilization that built small cities. And they're just now exploring these. Archaeologists are just now exploring these, the remains of these habitats. It's pretty interesting. So people have lived for a long time in conjunction with tropical rainforests, but right now, because of our advances in technology, it's much easier to cut down that rainforest at a faster rate than it was in the past. Tropical rainforests are vertically layered and competition for light is intense. Tropical forests are home to millions of animals, including an estimated 5 to 30 million still undescribed species of insects, spiders, and other arthropods. Rapid human population growth is now destroying many tropical forests. Okay, savannas occur in equatorial and subequatorial regions. Precipitation is seasonal. Usually there's a wet season and a dry season, and the temperature averages between 24 and 29 degrees Celsius, but is more seasonally variable than in the tropics. Here's a savanna in Kenya. Savannas are found in equatorial, subequatorial regions. Rainfall averages 30 to 50 centimeters per year and is seasonal, with a dry season that can last up to 9 months. Organisms, scattered trees are often thorny and have small leaves, an apparent adaptation to the relatively dry conditions. Fires are common in the dry season, and the dominant plant species are fire adapted and tolerant to seasonal drought. Grasses and small non-woody plants called forbs make up most of the ground cover. And the earliest humans likely lived in savannas. Overly frequent fires set by humans reduce tree regeneration by killing seedlings and saplings. Cattle ranching and overhunting have led to declines in the large mammal populations. Grasses and forbs form up most of the ground cover in savannas. The dominant plant species are fire adapted and tolerant of seasonal drought. Common inhabitants include insects and mammals such as wildebeest, zebras, lions, and hyenas. And fires set by humans help to maintain this biome. Fires do occur naturally in savanna regions. Savannas are like the chaparral region of California, and there are savannas in Southern California. Those are all fire-adapted regions, and they're constantly set on fire through lightning strikes and what have you. But it's also fire is a main part of savanna and chaparral and some of these temperate grassland and prairie areas, but they can be set by humans. Deserts occur in bands of near 30 degrees north and south of the equator, just where that Ferrel sail drops that cold, dry air down that dries up that precipitation. Precipitation is low and highly variable, generally less than 30 centimeters per year. Deserts may be hot, greater than 50 degrees Celsius, or cold, less than 30 degrees Celsius, with seasonal and daily temperature variation. Deserts occur in they occur in that desert region about 30 degrees north and south of latitude. For example, the Gobi Desert of north central Asia. Precipitation is low and highly variable, generally less than 30 centimeters per year. Temperature varies seasonally and daily. It may exceed 50 degrees in the hot deserts and fall below negative 30 in the cold deserts. Desert landscapes are dominated by low, widely scattered vegetation. Common plants include succulents such as cacti or euphorbs, deeply rooted shrubs, and herbs that grow during the infrequent moist periods. Desert plant adaptations include tolerance to heat and desiccation. water storage, reduced leaf surface area, and physical defenses such as spines and toxins in leaves. Okay, deserts can be delicate areas. They're susceptible. People put in wells in desert areas, and they take away water from the native vegetation. Urbanization and conversion to irrigated agriculture have reduced some natural diversity in some deserts. Deserts are adapted for heat and desiccation tolerance, water storage, and reduced leaf surface area. Common desert animals include scorpions, ants, beetles, snakes, lizards, migratory and resident birds, and seed-eating rodents are mainly are nocturnal. Urbanization and conversion to irrigated agriculture have reduced the natural biodiversity of some deserts. Chaparral occurs at mid-latitude coastal regions on several continents. Precipitation is highly seasonal with rainy winters and dry summers. Summer is hot, usually up above 30 degrees Celsius. Fall and winter and spring are cool at 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. This is a chaparral area in California. You can see these little shrub oak. They're oak trees, but they're very small. All the vegetation is pretty low to the ground here, and it's subject to frequent burning. This area in California has been pretty heavily settled, and it's been reduced through conversion to agriculture and urbanization. Humans contribute to fires that sweep across the chaparral. So even though fire is a naturally occurring part of these ecosystems, they're exacerbated by humans setting them with greater frequency. The chaparral is dominated by shrubs and small trees. Many plants are adapted to fire and drought. Animals include browsing mammals, insects, amphibians, small mammals, and birds. Humans have reduced chaparral areas through agriculture and urbanization. Temperate grasslands occur at the mid-latitudes. These are basically the prairies, often the interior of continents. Precipitation is highly seasonal. Winters are cold and dry, and summers are hot and wet. Here's a grassland in Mongolia. It might as well be a grassland in North America. In the grasslands in Mongolia, they have yaks, and here we have bison. They're ecologically similar animals. They've evolved similar traits through convergent evolution. I'm not sure what all occurs in Mongolia, but this is basically these temperate grasslands. They're the same thing as the prairies that we have in this country. The dominant plants, grasses, and forbs are adapted to droughts and fire. Native animals include large grazers such as bison and wild horses, and small burrowers such as prairie dogs. Most grasslands have been converted to farmland. Okay, prairie is prime farmland here in the United States. It's where you grow wheat and sugar beets in North Dakota, and there's all those animals and plants that is a great habitat. It's got great soil in it. That a lot of times in that prairie in the western part of the United States, that prairie has soil that's been brought down through glaciation. Glaciers push down big piles of soil. They made really deep pockets of fertile soil, and that's great for agriculture. Northern coniferous forest, or Cayega, spans the northern North America and Eurasia, and is the terrestrial biome on Earth, the largest terrestrial biome on Earth. Precipitation ranges from 30 to 70 centimeters, and the winters are cold, and summers may be hot. In Siberia, it ranges from 50 to 20 degrees Celsius. You can see some of this northern coniferous forest if you go to the western part of Virginia and the Tennessee, North Carolina region. There are this northern coniferous forest is still occurs on top of the mountains, where it was a glacial remnant. It was brought down. These taiga forest was brought down this far south by major glaciation events that came all the way down into Ohio, and then they, as they receded, they left these taiga, these northern coniferous forests, became stranded on the tops of the mountains where they had appropriate climate for them to grow. So it's interesting to consider climate and the northern coniferous forest. If you ever get a chance to go out to Damascus or Marion or some places like that out in the western part of the state. Okay, here's a coniferous forest in Norway. Norway's pretty far north, so it's not necessarily high elevation, but these forests are associated with high elevation or high latitudes. And this is they don't have obviously as much biological diversity as the tropical forests, but they are very important. These forests are contribute greatly to the production of oxygen in our atmosphere. Conifers such as pine, spruce, fir, and hemlock dominate. The conical shape of the forest prevents too much snow from accumulating and breaking their branches. These are all adaptations for the snowy environment. Animals include migratory and resident birds and large mammals such as moose, brown bears, and Siberian tigers. Periodic insect outbreaks kill vast tracts of trees. Some of the forests are being logged at an alarming rate. So, spruce and fir trees and pine trees that grow in that region, they make great timber, and they can be harvested very easily with modern equipment, and they can be productive parts of developing that resource for forest products. But it's also something we don't want to cut too much of them, because they are very important to our own ecology. Temperate broadleaf forest is found at the mid-latitudes of the northern hemisphere, with smaller areas in Chile, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. These are all temperate broadleaf forests is our native forest here in Virginia. Significant amounts of precipitation fall during the seasons such as rain or snow, and winters average 0 degrees in the summer and are hot and humid. And the summers are hot and humid. Okay, temperate broadleaf forest here in New Jersey. This, as you can see, it's got nice rolling hills. There are some really beautiful places in New Jersey. This is one of them. This is during the fall. You can tell that the fall colors are coming into play, and eventually these trees are going to lose their leaves. These are mostly oaks and maples, and they're going to lose their leaves, and then when they lose their leaves in the winter, that prepares them for the ice and the snow. So the ice and snow, if they had leaves during the winter, the ice and snow would cling onto their leaves and break their branches. So by losing their leaves, it's an adaptation to prepare for the winter weather. Dominant plants include deciduous trees in the northern hemisphere and evergreen eucalyptus in Australia. In the northern hemisphere, many mammals hibernate in the winter. Birds migrate to warmer areas. These forests have been heavily settled on all continents, but they are recovering in places. So basically, all of the forests that you see here around in Virginia and all around the East Coast, it's all secondary regrowth. There's only very few places where there's have primary forests that haven't been cut. Everything else around here is secondary regrowth, and these forests the climate that they grow in is very hospitable to people to live in. The winters are tolerable and the summers are well. That's why they're called the temperate forests. The tundra covers an expansive area of Arctic alpine the alpine tundra exists on high mountaintops at all latitudes. You can even see remnants of these mountaintop tundras in Virginia. They're called mountaintop balds, and they occur in that taiga, around that taiga northern coniferous forest biome that I was describing. Precipitation is low in Arctic tundra and higher in the alpine tundra. Winters are cold, below 30 degrees Celsius, and summers are relatively cold. So even though they don't have fire is not really a huge concern in the tundras, there is just extreme wind and cold. Here is the Dovrefjell National Park in Norway. This is a good example of tundra here. You can see the low-growing shrubs here, and you can see rocks and sand are readily apparent. It's all very close to the surface of the earth here. So there's not a lot of deep soil in a tundra, and there is a lot of low-growing shrubs, like a lot of mosses and lichens will grow on these rocks, and these low-growing shrubs will grow in this area. Vegetation is herbaceous, consisting of mosses, grasses, forbs, and dwarf shrubs, and trees, and lichens. Permafrost is a permanently frozen layer of soil that restricts the growth of plant roots. Mammals include musk oxen, caribou, reindeer, wolves, bears, foxes. Many migratory species nest in the summer. The tundra region is a big area for migratory birds. Migratory birds love to go and nest up hatch their eggs up in the tundra. The settlement is sparse, but tundra has become the focus of oil and mineral extraction. So there's a lot of mineral resources that underlie these areas, and they can be considered fragile areas, and so they need to be protected. The people need to be careful about how they drill in these areas. Aquatic biomes are diverse and dynamic systems that cover most of the Earth. Aquatic biomes account for the largest part of the biosphere in terms of area. They show less latitudinal variation than terrestrial biomes. Marine biomes have salt concentrations of about 3%, and the largest marine biome is made of oceans, which cover about 75% of the Earth's surface and have an enormous impact on the biosphere. So marine biomes are a huge part of our ecosystem, our global ecology. Freshwater biomes have salt concentrations of less than 0.1%, and freshwater biomes are closely linked to soils and biotic components of the surrounding terrestrial biome. Okay, I don't know if you can get these videos on you when you look on your. They're just different things that live in the aquatic marine environment. Aquatic biomes can be characterized by their physical and chemical environment, geological features, photosynthetic organisms, and heterotrophs. Okay, wetlands and estuaries are among the most productive habitats on Earth. Wetlands are inundated by water, and at least sometimes, and support plants that are adapted to water-saturated soil. An estuary is a transition area between the sea and where salinity varies with the rise and fall of tides. High organic production and decomposition of these biomes results in low levels of dissolved oxygen. Wetlands are common in Virginia. You can see them along basically along any riverine habitat that we have here, particularly where the river spreads out and gets nice and broad, or in the coastal habitats. There are coastal wetlands and riverine wetlands. Estuaries like the Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the world. It's an area where saltwater and freshwater mix, and it's a very highly productive ecosystem. The basin of wetlands in the United Kingdom. Okay, so yes, here is a wetland in the United Kingdom. This is a freshwater wetland. Wetlands can develop in shallow basins along flooded riverbanks or on the coasts of large lakes. Estuaries include a complex network of tidal channels, islands, and mudflats. Plants are adapted to growing in periodically anaerobic water-saturated soils. Wetland plants include cattails and sedges. Estuaries are characterized by salt marsh grasses. Wetlands are home to diverse invertebrates and birds, as well as frogs and alligators. Estuaries support an abundance of marine invertebrates, fish, waterfowl, and marine mammals. Humans' activities have destroyed up to 90% of wetlands and disrupted estuaries worldwide. And why is this? Because humans like to live on the coastland. And so wherever we live on the coastland, we take an impact on those grasslands and wetlands and estuaries. Lakes vary in size from small ponds to very large lakes, like the Great Lakes up in the northern part of this country. Temperate lakes may actually have a seasonal thermocline. Tropical lowland lakes have a year-round thermocline. Oligotrophic lakes are nutrient poor and generally oxygen rich. Typically they're found in mountainous regions. And eutrophic lakes are usually in lower lands. They're nutrient rich and often depleted of oxygen if ice covered in winter. Okay, here's an oligotrophic lake in Alberta, Canada. Standing bodies of water range from ponds to a few square meters into lakes covering thousands of square kilometers. Light decreases with depth and creating photic and aphotic zones. Temperate lakes may have a seasonal thermocline. Tropical lowland lakes have a thermocline year-round. Oligotrophic lakes are nutrient poor and generally oxygen rich. Okay, eutrophic lakes are nutrient rich and often depleted of oxygen in the deepest zone in the summer if covered with ice in the winter. High rates of decomposition in the deeper layers of eutrophic lakes cause periodic oxygen depletion. Okay, you can remember the difference between oligotrophic and eutrophic, because oligotrophic are these mountainous, clear lakes, and eutrophic are lowland lakes that typically get they might get influence from fertilizer and agricultural runoff, and that could cause eutrophication. So eutrophication is when a lake has too much nutrients, and that can cause it to deplete its oxygen. Eutrophic lakes have more surface area relative to depth than oligotrophic lakes. So eutrophic lakes are shallower. Rooted and floating aquatic plants live in the shallow and well-lighted littoral zone close to shore. Water is too deep in the limnetic zone to support rooted aquatic plants. The primary producers are phytoplanktons. Zooplankton are drifting heterotrophs that graze on phytoplankton. Invertebrates live in the benthic zone. And fishes live in all zones with sufficient oxygen. Human-induced nutrient enrichment can lead to algal blooms, oxygen depletion, and fish kills. Streams and rivers have varying environmental conditions from headwater to mouth. Headwater streams are generally cold, clear, turbulent, swift, and oxygen-rich. They are often narrow and rocky. These are the streams that we associate with the mountains and the mountainous regions. Downstream waters form rivers that are generally warmer and more turbid, and they are often wide and meandering and have silty bottoms. Salt and nutrients increase from headwaters to mouth. And oxygen content decreases from headwaters to mouth. Okay, so there's okay, so you get more nutrients in the upstream but you get less nutrient, or you get less oxygen. You get less oxygen downstream. Yeah, these are headwaters from a stream in Washington. Okay, headwater streams generally are mountain streams. Headwater streams may be rich in phytoplankton or rooted aquatic plants. A diversity of fishes and invertebrates inhabit unpolluted rivers and streams. In fact, you can actually determine the water quality of a stream by the diversity of invertebrates that inhabit that stream. Pollution degrades water quality and kills aquatic organisms. Dams impair natural flow of stream and river ecosystems. Okay, so dams are important because they're a way of producing energy and electricity that does not have carbon pollution with it associated with it, but they do have a cost because they do impair the natural flow of streams and rivers. So it's important to try to balance those aspects of human need. Intertidal zones are periodically submerged and exposed by the tides. Intertidal organisms are challenged by variations in temperature and salinity by the mechanical forces of wave action. Oxygen and nutrient levels are high in the intertidal zones, and substrates vary from rocky to sandy. Okay, here's a rocky intertidal zone on the Oregon coast. You can see there's a lot of mussels here, and these are some sea anemones in green here, and then these are sea stars here. You can see they're located on these on the intertidal zone here. Protected sandy zones support seagrass and algae, and rocky zones support attachment of marine algae. In rocky zones, many animals have structural adaptations for attaching to the rock, like limpets, for example. In sandy zones, limpets are like mollusks that have a muscular foot that they use to attach to the rocky substrate. In sandy zones, worms, clams, and crustaceans bury themselves in sand. Other animals include sponges, sea anemones, and small fishes. Oil pollution has disrupted many intertidal areas. Coral reefs are formed in the calcium carbonate skeletons of corals. Okay, so coral reefs are a very important, beautiful, and interesting biome. They have great diversity, and they are important indicators of ecosystem health. Coral reefs are formed by the calcium carbonate skeletons of corals, which are cnidarians. jellyfish or sea anemones. Shallow reef-building corals live in the photic zone and warm about 20 to 30 degrees Celsius clear water. Deep sea corals live at 200 to 1,500 meters. Most corals live in shallow areas because they have symbiotic algae that live along with them that help them to build their calcareous structures. Corals require high oxygen concentration and a solid substrate for attachment. A coral reef progresses from a fringing reef to a barrier reef to a coral atoll. And depending on sea level rise or fall, those atolls can become the basis of islands in the, like for example, there are coral atolls that are islands in the South Pacific. They're low-lying islands. Here's a coral reef in the Red Sea, which is in the off the Mediterranean area, in the well, it's off the coast of Israel. It's a very beautiful area there, and it has a beautiful high diversity of fish. You can see this is characteristic of most coral reefs. You can see there are many different forms of coral here. There's these little lumpy brain coral here, and these staghorn coral. There's many different species of coral, and the structure of these coral reefs, they give advantage to other organisms, other invertebrates, and organisms that and algae that form the basis of the food chain that supports these other very high diversity of fish life here. So this these coral reef diversity is very important, and it's a very high biodiversity area. Corals are the predominant animals on the reef. They form mutualisms with symbiotic algae that provides them organic molecules. These are known as the zooxanthellae. They're very important symbiotic algae. In fact, in certain areas where water temperature has been raised above a set point, these corals will expel their symbiotic algae in a process called coral bleaching, and that will indicate poor coral health. And it's often due to global warming, to climate change. So high diversity of fish and invertebrates inhabit coral reefs. Coral collection, overfishing, global warming, and pollution, and all contribute to reduction in coral populations. In fact, there's some areas in the South Pacific where they go fishing with sticks of dynamite. They'll just throw a stick of dynamite over and blow up a bunch of fish and then collect them on the surface, and obviously this has an adverse impact on the coral. The oceanic pelagic zone is constantly mixed by wind-driven oceanic currents. Okay, and some of these currents are upwellings that come from deep waters as well. Oxygen levels are high, and the turnover in the temperate oceans renew nutrients in the photic zone. This biome covers approximately 70% of the Earth's surface. So the oceanic pelagic zone is where we find like tuna fish and swordfish and a lot of those fish that are high in mercury, but people like to eat anyway. These are areas that are basically like the open ocean. Here's the open ocean near Iceland with a humpback whale. Let's see if there's anything I can read to you here. The oceanic pelagic zone is a vast realm of open blue water whose surface is constantly mixed by wind-driven currents. Because of higher water clarity, the photic zone extends to greater depths than in the coastal marine waters. The the oxygen is generally high and nutrient levels are generally lower than in coastal waters. Mixing the surface and deeper waters in fall and spring renews the nutrients and the photic zone and the temperate and high latitude zones. The dominant photosynthetic organisms are bacteria and other phytoplankton, which drift in the currents and account for half of all global productivity. Phytoplankton and zooplankton are the dominant organisms of this biome. Also found are free-swimming organisms. Zooplankton includes protists, worms, krill, jellies, and invertebrate larvae. The animals include squids, fishes, sea turtles, and marine mammals. Overfishing has depleted fish stocks. Humans have polluted oceans with the dumping of waste. You may be familiar with the Pacific Ocean garbage patch. It's about the size of, there's two of them, one in the eastern Pacific and one in the western Pacific, and they're both about the size of the state of Texas. They're areas where there's a concentration because of the nature of oceanic currents. They've collected these trash, and that's just been dumped into the ocean, and it's collected in these areas. It's not like a big, it's not like something you can stand on. It's just an area where there's like a higher concentration of garbage than there is in any other ocean in the world. And overfishing is a chronic problem with humans. We have high population densities, and we eat fish. And it's important for us to catch and eat fish, but we do so at a rate that is often unsustainable. The cod fisheries in Massachusetts area have collapsed in recent years. They've had to undergo extreme protection, and also tunas are also becoming more rare. Tuna is a very popular fish worldwide because it's so large and it's delicious to eat. I'll be frank with you, but it's not something that we can sustain harvesting on our current levels. The marine benthic zone consists of the sea floor. Organisms in the very deep benthic or abyssal zone are adapted to continuous cold and high water pressure. Substrate is mainly soft sediments. In some areas it's rocky. The abyssal zone has very interesting organisms that live in it, like the anglerfish and the gulper eel. These are extremely weird-looking animals. They have giant, sharp teeth, and the anglerfish has a little bioluminescent organ on the front of its mouth where it dangles it and tries to get other fish to come in close enough that it can gulp them down. I don't think they have a lot of information about they don't have a lot of photographs about the marine benthic zone, but it's really interesting to consider, and I urge you all to just take a minute and go on Google and Google abyssal fish or anglerfish or gulper eel or vampire squid. That's another organism that lives in this area. It's way down below the influence of sunlight, and it's got its own ecosystem. A lot of organisms down there just sit and wait for something to fall down from below, like a giant whale carcass or what have you. Shallow areas contain seaweeds and filamentous algae. In dark, hot environments near deep sea hydrothermal vents of volcanic origin, the producers are chemoautotrophic prokaryotes, giant tube worms and arthropods, and echinoderms are abundant heterotrophs near these hydrothermal vents. So in these hydrothermal vents, these are areas where there's no sunlight, and there's these tube worms, and you can see all these crabs that live around these tube worms. They're picking off little things that they can get onto, any sort of detritus that might float by in the water and get stuck on these tube worms. And these tube worms are based on a bacteria that's a chemoautotrophic prokaryote, and it's able to produce its own energy through degrading hydrogen sulfide. And in these gills of these tube worms, actually what they're doing is hosting these chemoautotrophic prokaryotes, and they're providing the foundation for hydrogen sulfide production of energy. Coastal benthic communities include invertebrates and fishes, and overfishing and dumping of organic waste have depleted fish populations. The zonation in aquatic biomes. Many aquatic biomes are stratified into zones or layers defined by light penetration, temperature, and depth. The upper or photic zone has sufficient light for photosynthesis, while the lower aphotic zone receives little light. The photic zone and the aphotic zone make up the pelagic zone. The organic and inorganic sediment at the bottom of all aquatic zones is called the benthic zone. Communities of organisms that live in the benthic zone are called the benthos. This includes like oligochaetes and annelids and different kinds of worms and organisms that live in that silty benthic zone. Okay, here's a zonation in a lake. There's the littoral zone near the coast here, near the region here that is the change between the land and the water. There's the photic zone. This is the area that's affected by light. This is where you can find your photosynthetic plankton. And then down below the photic zone is the aphotic zone, or without light. And this is also considered, this area away from the littoral zone is the limnetic zone, or the pelagic zone. This is the area away from the littoral zone, away from the shore. And then the benthic zone is all this area here along the bottom of the shore. This is the substrate, the benthos. Okay, in the ocean, you're looking at deeper area here with the abyssal zone, which gets absolutely no sunlight, and that the benthic abyssal zone is where you have some really interesting organisms. In oceans and most lakes, the temperature boundary is called the thermocline that separates the warm upper layer from the cold deeper water. Communities in aquatic biomes vary with depth, light penetration, distance from shore, and position of pelagic or benthic zone. Most organisms occur in the relatively shallow photic zone. The aphotic zone in oceans is extensive but harbors little life. Okay, we're halfway through. Concept 40.3. Interactions between organisms and the environment limit the distribution of species. Species distributions are the result of ecological and evolutionary interactions through time. Ecological time is the minute-to-minute frame of interactions between organisms and the environment. Evolutionary time spans many generations and captures adaptations through natural selection. Events in ecological time can lead to evolution. For example, Galapagos finches with larger beaks were more likely to survive in a drought as they could eat the available larger seeds. As a result, the average beak size was larger in the next generation. This resulted in evolutionary change. Okay, Darwin's finches are a classic example. Ecologists ask questions about where species occur and why species occur where they do. Why is species X absent from an area? Does dispersal limit its distribution? If so, then perhaps the area is inaccessible or unavailable for an insufficient period of time. If no, then do biotic factors affect this species distribution? If yes, then predation and parasitism, competition and disease, other biotic factors are affecting the distribution. If not, then we have to look at the abiotic factors that limit its distribution. If those are they chemical factors like water, oxygen, salinity, pH, soil nutrients, or are they physical factors like temperature, light, soil structure, and fire and moisture? Okay, so these are all interactions between organisms and the environment that limit the distribution of the species. Distribution and dispersal. Dispersal is the movement of individuals away from centers of high population density or from their area of origin. Dispersal contributes to the global distribution of organisms. Transplants indicate if dispersal is a key factor limiting species distributions. Transplants include organisms that are intentionally or accidentally relocated from their original distribution. If a transplant is successful, it indicates that the species' potential range is larger than actual range. Species transplants can distribute the communities or ecosystems to which that they have been introduced. Okay, the dark side of this is when you have exotic species that are introduced into a native habitat, like when you take the kudzu and you take it from Southeast Asia and transport it to southeastern United States, and then it takes over that whole area there. So that transplant was successful, but it's actually more than what we bargained for. Okay, biotic factors that affect the distribution of an organism may include predation, herbivory. For example, when sea urchins can limit the distribution of seaweeds, that's one of our exercises coming up here. Mutualism, when they find favorable symbiotic relationships. Parasitism that may inhibit their success, and competition that could prevent them from exploiting resources that are otherwise available. Okay, so here's an experiment where they took sea urchins and limpets, and they looked at the amount of seaweeds that were available. Okay, so this is what happened: is they took almost basically no seaweed. Almost no seaweed grew in areas where there were both urchins and limpets present, and where only limpets were removed. So you remove limpets and allow the sea urchins to continue, and these lines are showing the amount of seaweed that's present. Okay, so normally there's not much seaweed present, and then you removed sea urchins, and you got like a lot of seaweed returned to that area, and then you removed limpets and seaweeds, and you got even more urchins, or even more. You removed limpets and urchins, and you got even more seaweeds to return to that area. So removing both limpets and urchins resulted in the greatest increase in seaweed cover, indicating that both species had some influence of seaweed distribution. But since the removing only urchins greatly increased seaweed growth, while removing only limpets had little effect, the authors concluded that sea urchins have much greater effect than limpets in limiting seaweed distribution. Okay, abiotic factors affecting distribution of organisms include temperature, water, oxygen, salinity, sea light, rocks and soil, pH of the soil, different mineral aspects, available nitrogen. These are all abiotic factors that affect distribution of organisms. Temperature is an important environmental factor in the distribution of the organisms because of its effects on biological processes. Cells may freeze and rupture below 0 degrees Celsius unless they're specially adapted, while most proteins denature above 45 degrees Celsius. Most organisms function best within a specific temperature range. The availability of water and oxygen is an important factor in species distribution. Desert organisms exhibit adaptations for water conservation. Water affects oxygen availability as oxygen diffuses slowly in water. Oxygen concentrations can be low in deep oceans and deep lakes. Salinity, salt concentration affects the water balance of organisms through osmosis. Most aquatic organisms are restricted to either freshwater or saltwater habitats. Few terrestrial organisms are adapted to high salinity habitats. Sunlight is the energy source for photosynthetic organisms and, as such, can limit their distribution. In aquatic environments, most photosynthesis occurs near the surface where sunlight is available. Shading by the canopy drives intense competition for light in forests, unless you're a shade-adapted plant. Rocks and soil have many characteristics that limit the distribution of plants and thus animals that feed on them. Their physical structure, the soil may or may not be adapted to certain plants, may or may not be adapted to whether that's gravel or soil or loamy soil or sandy soil. pH of the soil and mineral composition, all of these aspects are abiotic factors that have effect on distribution of plants. Okay, dynamic biological processes influence population density, dispersion, and demographics. Population ecology explores how biotic and abiotic factors influence density, distribution, and the size of populations. The population is a group of individuals of a single species living in a same general area. Populations are described by their boundaries and size. Density is the number of individuals per unit area or volume, and dispersion is the pattern of spacing among individuals within boundaries of the population. So dispersion can vary over topographical features and depending on the species. In most cases, it's impractical or impossible to count all individuals in a population. So sampling techniques can be used to estimate densities and total population sizes. Population density can be estimated by extrapolation from small samples or an index of a population. For example, when we're studying predator species, particularly felids, we study the dispersal and infer the density from the dispersal. So a jaguar may have a home range size of 6 square miles, and then if it's a male jaguar, it may have a larger home range size of 20 square miles, and that home range may overlap 2 or 3 females, and then we can, based on those characteristics of those the male home range, we can estimate how many may exist in a given size of a parkland or an area where jaguar are inhabiting, based on the this density of the population and the dispersal, the nature of their how they fit together. Density is the result of an interplay between processes that individuals into a population and those that remove individuals. Additions occur through birth and immigration, the influx of new individuals from other areas. Removal of individuals through death and emigration, the movement of individuals out of a population, are all ways that we can assess the population. Okay, so here is a schematic. It shows births. These are contributing. This one bird has 2 offspring. They contribute to the population here. Deaths are could be by predation, or they could get frozen to death, or you never know what can happen in the wild. Emigration is when these birds leave that population, and immigration is when birds come into that population. So considering these different characteristics is how we look at patterns of dispersal and patterns of density. Environmental and social factors influence the spacing of individuals in a population. The most common pattern of dispersion is clumped, which individuals aggregate into patches. A clumped dispersion may influence by resource availability and behavior. Okay, so here are little starfishes. They are clumped around the resource that they're feeding on here on this rocky shore. Here's a uniform distribution of king penguins in Antarctica. These guys, they stake out a territory, and they try to keep close together because it keeps cold. When it's really cold, they may have to huddle up together. But other than that, and in the springtime, they are sitting on their eggs. Typically the male will sit on the egg, and then they will guard their territory from the other penguins. And sometimes if a hatchling gets out from under the penguin parent, it may go stray too close to one of these other penguins, and those other penguins might even kill it. So that's why they keep a uniform distribution across this habitat. And then random distribution is like, for example, these are dandelions, and they produce tons of seed, and the seed get dispersed on the wind. It's a very effective way of spreading the wind, and then they just find their seeds, find their purchase in random locations throughout the field, and then that's where the next dandelion pops up, and that's basically random distribution. Random dispersion. Okay, here's our, there we go. Clumped, uniform, and random. There's 3 forms of patterns of distribution. Uniform dispersion is one in which individuals are evenly distributed. It may be influenced by social interactions such as territoriality, the defense of a bounded space against other individuals. Okay, that's what I was talking about with those penguins. In random dispersion, the position of each individual is independent of other individuals. It occurs in the absence of strong attractions or repulsions. Demography is the study of vital statistics of a population and how they change over time. Death rates and birth rates are of particular interest to demographers. A life table is a age-specific summary of a survival pattern of a population. It's best made by following the fate of a cohort, a group of individuals of the same age from a birth to death. Survivorship curve is a graphic way of representing the data in a life table. Survivorship curves plot the proportion or numbers of a cohort still alive at each age. Survivorship curves can be classified into 3 general types. Type Type 1 is low death rates during middle or early life, and an increase in death rates among older age. These are typically species that have high degree of parental care. Type 2 is a constant death rate over the organism's lifespan. They're as likely to die in the beginning of life as they are at the end of life. That didn't make sense, but they're as likely to die early in age as they are later in age. Type 3 is the high death rates of young and low death rate for survivors. So basically, type 3 is when you've got, frogs have lots of eggs, and they bank on just a few of those making it to maturity. Many species are intermediate to these curves. Okay, here's an example. Type 1 is the humans. We have a high degree of parental care, and we generally live into our later years, into our later part of our life, and then we, generally speaking, we die of more natural causes. Giraffes are like this. They have any mammals are basically, most mammals are like this. Giraffes, elephants, animals that invest in a couple of years in taking care of their offspring, and then those offspring make it to later years where they die of old age or disease. Here's a Belding's ground squirrel. It's I don't know if this is accurate, but according to this graph, they're just as likely to die early in life as they are later in life. They don't have a great deal. They don't have a great deal of parental care, and but they do make it to later on in life. And then here's an oyster, or it could be a coral, or palolo worms, or these. They're worms that live in the South Pacific that spawn during a particular period. They just cast their gametes to the waters, and they try to produce a high number of offspring, and that high number of offspring, like the frogs, produce a lot of eggs, but of those eggs, only a few survive into maturity. So this is an oyster here representing that. So high number of offspring, low parental care, a few live into maturity. Okay, for species with sexual reproduction, demographers often concentrate on females in a population. A reproductive table or fertility schedule is an age-specific summary of the reproductive rates in a population. It describes the reproductive patterns of a population. So here's our Belding's ground squirrel at Tioga Pass. This shows that basically, in the first year, there's not a lot of weaning. There's not a lot of females weaning a litter. This is the mean. This category shows the mean size of litters, and this shows the mean number of females in a litter and the average number of female offspring. So, as you get greater in age, you're going to get a greater proportion of females weaning a litter. So these are more and more females are having offspring, but their litter sizes are decreasing the older they get. So you get they're having their greater proportion of the population, but smaller number of offspring in those litters, in those populations. So there's basically your prime age of having of offspring, litter size, and proportion of females weaning in the litter is around 4 to 6 years of age. That's where you got high litter size and high proportion of the females weaning. Okay, so the average number of female offspring in the proportion weaning is the litter is multiplied by the mean number of litters in the female. So this is average number of female offspring. Okay, that is all right, this is your value to look at here. This is the highest number of offspring is in these years here, and it decreases as you get older. Okay, the exponential and logistic models describe growth of populations. Unlimited growth occurs under ideal conditions in nature. Growth is limited by various factors. Ecologists study growth based on idealized and realistic conditions. So, the change in the population increase can be defined by the equation: the change in population size equals births plus immigrants minus deaths minus emigrants. If immigration and immigration are ignored, a population's growth rate of per capita increase equals the birth rate minus the death rate. And that's the calculations that we're going to use here. It's just births minus deaths. A population growth rate can be expressed mathematically as delta n over delta t equals b minus d, where delta n is the change in population size and delta t is the time interval, b is the number of births, and d is the number of deaths. Births and deaths can be expressed as an average of number of births and deaths per individual during the specified time interval. So births over time and deaths is mortality of births over population and mortality times population, where B is the annual per capita rate and M for mortality is the per capita death rate and N is the population size. The population growth rate equation can be revised as delta N over delta T equals Bn minus Mn. Now we can revise the population growth equation again using per capita birth and death rates rather than births and deaths. Okay, per capita rate of increase is given by R. This is rate is B minus M. Zero population growth occurs when the birth rate equals the death rate. R equals 0. Okay, one final simplification is in order. The population ecologists are most interested in the difference between per capita birth rate and per capita death rate. This difference is the per capita rate of increase, R. The change in population increase can now be written as delta N over delta T equals growth rate over the per capita N. So the value of R indicates whether a given proportion is growing, R is greater than 0, or declining, R is less than 0. Zero population growth occurs when the per capita birth and death rate are equal. R equals 0. Births and deaths still occur in such a population, of course, but they balance each other exactly. Using the per capita rate of increase, we can now rewrite the equation for the population size as delta N over delta T equals delta Rn. Okay, remember that this equation is for a specific time interval, often 1 year, and does not include immigration or emigration. Most ecologists prefer to use differential calculus to express population instantaneously. Okay, the instantaneous growth rate can be expressed as dn over dt equals r instantaneous n, where r instantaneous n is the instantaneous per capita rate of increase. I don't think we're going to get into that too deeply. Now we're going to look at exponential growth. Exponential growth is population increase under idealized conditions. These conditions are the rate of increase is at its maximum. It's known as R max. The equation of the exponential growth is dn over dt equals r max over n. Earlier we described a population whose members all have access to abundant food and are free to reproduce at their physiological capacity. Population increase under these ideal conditions is called exponential population growth. Under these conditions, the per capita rate of increase may assume the maximum rate for the species, denoted as R max. The equation for population growth is as below: dn over dt, R max over n. The exponential population growth relates in a J-shaped curve. Okay, here are some exponential growth curves. This graph compares the growth in two populations with different values of R max, increasing the value of R max from 0.5 to 1.0 increases the rate of the rise in the population over time, as reflected by relative slopes and the curves of any given population size. So when the growth rate is R max is 1, it's the growth rate is greater. You get increase in a fewer number of generations. And your growth rate is lower, 0.5. It takes more generations to reach your maximum exponential potential. The J-shaped curve of exponential growth rates populations is new environments or rebounding populations. For example, the elephant population in Kruger National Park, South Africa, grew exponentially after hunting was banned. Okay, so once hunting was taken out of the equation as a limiting factor, elephants were only challenged by the amount of food that they could eat, because there's not really many other predators of animals, but of elephants besides humans, considering how large they are. Okay, carrying capacity is the idea that exponential growth cannot be sustained for long in any population. More realistic population growth limits growth by incorporating a carrying capacity. Carrying capacity, or K, is the maximum population size that the environment can support. Carrying capacity varies with the abundance of limiting resources. Okay, so for example, down here with the carrying capacity was really low when elephants were being hunted. But when you remove that hunting pressure, it allowed them to grow exponentially. But they're not going to grow exponentially forever, because even though they have few predators, they still have limitations based on the food that's available. So eventually this is going to level off here, and that's what we're going to talk about next, carrying capacity. Carrying capacity varies with the abundance of limiting resources. In the logistic population growth model, the per capita rate of increase declines as carrying capacity is reached. The logistic model starts with the exponential model and adds an expression that reduces per capita rate of increase as n approaches k. Okay, so this gets a little complicated here. We can modify our mathematical model to include changes that in growth rate as n increases in the logistic population growth model. The per capita rate of increases approaches 0 as the population nears its carrying capacity. To construct the logistic model, we start with the exponential population growth model and add an expression that reduces the per capita rate of increase as n increases. If the maximum sustainable population size, carrying capacity, is k, then k minus n is the number of the additional individuals of the environment can support. And k minus n divided by k is the fraction of k that is still available for population growth. By multiplying the exponential rate of increase, R max n, by k minus n divided by k, we modify the change in the proportion, the population size, as n increases. So k limits n. So this is the exponential growth population calculation here, and then we add this limiting factor here. You have to know the carrying capacity, and if you know the carrying capacity, then you use that minus n, which is the population, population is constantly being recalculated by this equation over the carrying capacity. So when n is small compared to k, the term k minus n divided by k is close to 1, and the per capita rate of increase, R max, k minus n divided by k, approaches the maximum rate of increase. When the n is large and the resources are limiting, then k minus n divided by k is close to 0, and the per capita rate of increase is small. When n equals k, the population growth stops growing. This table here shows that calculations of the population growth rate of a hypothetical model population growing according to a logistic model with R max equals 1.0 per individual per year. Notice that the overall population growth rate is highest at 375 individuals per year. Okay, this is basically so the optimal population growth rate occurs at population size 750, and that is half of k. So half of k is usually where you find the optimum population growth. Okay, here's the population growth rate as R max is 1, is constant throughout this equation. K minus n minus k is the population recycled through here. When you reach population carrying capacity of 1,500 individuals in the population size, then carrying capacity dictates that no further growth will occur. So growth rate equals 0, and per capita growth rate is also 0. And this value here is then 0. So at the maximum possible growth rate here is 375 375 individuals per year at 750. Okay, so let's go back. I'll continue reading here. At a population size of 750, the per capita growth rate increase remains relatively high, 1/2 of the maximum growth rate. And here there are more reproducing individuals than in the population than at lower population sizes. The logistic model of a population growth curve is a sigmoidal or S curve. Okay, so here is the logistic curve. This is what it looks like here. Here's your population carrying capacity, 1,500 individuals. Let's say these are elephants in Kruger National Park. But your growth rate is optimized right here at 750 individuals per year. Or 300. I'm sorry, it was 375 individuals per year. That's your maximum growth rate. This is if you consider this same growth rate, 1.0 growth rate per individuals with an exponential growth rate. The growth rate is this way, and then if you add carrying capacity, you're going to get a sigmoidal curve in here. Okay, so this is your carrying capacity calculation right here. Okay, 1.0 over n, whatever your n is Your N is going to vary over time, and you're going to calculate that based on the growth rate, and then it's going to show you that your growth rate is going to level off at the carrying capacity. The rate of population growth decreases as population size N approaches the carrying capacity K of the environment. The red line shows the logistic curve in a population where Rmax equals 1.0 and K equals 1,500 individuals. For comparison, the blue line illustrates a population continuing to grow exponentially with the same Rmax. The growth of many laboratory populations, including paramecia, fits a S-shaped curve when resources are limited. These organisms are grown in a constant environment lacking predators and competitors. Okay, here's a paramecium versus a daphnia, and if you look at the predicted growth rate curve and based on carrying capacity of the paramecium, the scatter plot follows that pretty closely. But if you look at the daphnia, the water flea, its scatter plot goes way above carrying capacity, and then the populations kind of crash until they attain a more level rate of growth rate 0 at carrying capacity. Now, it's interesting because it's believed that human populations are following the path of the water flea rather than the path of the paramecium. So our populations are increased very highly, and they exceed the carrying capacity. It's believed that human population growth is exceeding carrying capacity at this time, and that there will be a correction for that so that we attain 0 growth rate at carrying capacity. But that's all going to take some amount of time. Growth rate in the small, so the paramecium growth in a small culture closely approximates logistic growth if the researcher maintains a constant environment. In the daphnia, the growth in the small culture does not correspond well with the logistic model. This population overshoots the carrying capacity of its artificial environment before reaching an approximately stable size. So some populations overshoot carrying capacity before settling down to a relatively stable density. Some populations fluctuate greatly and make it difficult to define carrying capacity. The logistic model fits a few real populations, but it's useful for estimating population growth. Conservation biologists can use the model to estimate the critical size below which populations may become extinct. Population dynamics are influenced strongly by life history traits and population density. An organism's life history comprises the traits that affect its schedule of reproduction and survival. The age at which reproduction occurs, how often these organism reproduces, and how many offspring are produced during each reproductive cycle. These are the important aspects of an organism's life cycle. Organisms have finite resources, which may lead to trade-offs between survival and reproduction. Selective pressures influence the trade-off between the number and size of offspring. Some plants produce a large number of small seeds, ensuring that at least some of them will grow and reproduce eventually. Dandelions grow quickly and release a number of tiny fruits. You're all familiar with that. That would be like an R-selected species. Brazil nut tree produces a moderate number of seed pods in left, shown here in the left. That would be more like a K-selected species. Okay, so depending on the different life histories of these organisms, it's going to dictate how fast they're able to reproduce. Dandelions grow quickly and release a large number of tiny fruits. Brazil nut tree produces a number of large seeds and pods. Okay, the Brazil nut produces a moderate number of large seeds and pods. Other types of plants reproduce a moderate number of large seeds that produce a large stored energy of help that will help seedlings to become established. So that's kind of like parental care, or the equivalent of parental care in a plant. K selection, or density-dependent selection, selects for life history traits that are sensitive to population density. R selection, or density-independent selection, selects for life history traits that maximize reproduction. In density-independent populations, birth rate and death rate do not change with population density. In density-dependent populations, birth rates fall and death rates rise with population density. So populations are able to regulate their own population density given the limiting factors surrounding them, and also in some cases populations are able to limit themselves, like the certain mammals will reproduce less frequently if there is a high population density. When population density is low, as in births and births are greater than mortality, as a result the population density grows until it reaches Q. Okay, Q is equilibrium density. This is an imaginary optimal population density. When population density is high, mortality is greater than births, and the population shrinks until density reaches Q. So here's the density-independent death rate. This is constant over time, and then birth rate is either going to be adjusted to be greater or lower until it reaches the optimal population density. So population density increases and birth rate decreases. Population density decreases and birth rate increases. This simple model considers only birth and death rates. Immigration and emigration rates are assumed to be either zero or equal. In this example, the birth rate changes with population density, while the death rate is constant. At the equilibrium density, Q, the birth rate and death rate are equal. Mechanisms of density-dependent population regulation. Density-dependent birth and death rates are an example of negative feedback that regulates population growth. Density-dependent birth and death rates are affected by many factors such as competition for resources, territoriality, diseases, predation, toxic waste, and intrinsic factors. Competition for resources occurs in crowded populations. An increasing population density intensifies competition for resources and results in a lower birth rate. So the more you're competing for these resources, the less of those resources you're getting, and the less of those resources then you're getting, the lower your birth rate becomes. Okay, here's a bunch of wheat. What does it say about that? Increasing population density intensifies competition for nutrients and other resources, reducing reproductive fitness. Farmers minimize the effect of resource competition on the growth of wheat and other crops by applying fertilizers to reduce nutrient limitations on crop yields. Okay, so here's a case where these nutrient limitations are being thwarted by humans intervening to increase an agricultural yield in an agricultural crop. Toxic waste produced by a population can accumulate in the environment contributing to density-dependent regulation of populations. You can take this literally if you looked at human populations in areas where there's increased toxic waste being released that may decrease the number of viable offspring. Or you can also take a look at yeast. Yeast are used in making wine or beer. They almost never have more than greater than 13% alcohol in concentration in wine, because that's the level that kills the yeast fungus. So in this case, the optimum population is caused by the production of ethanol in the wine. Predation may increase the increasing population of size due to predator preference for abundant prey species. Okay, so if you have animals like these microtine rodents that increase population boom cycles, those population boom cycles just make it easier for predators to catch them. Those predators catch those rodents, and they put a cap on the population size. They decrease the population size until such time as they're able to reproduce and produce more offspring again. Territoriality can limit population density when space becomes a limited resource. This is kind of like competition for resources. Here's a cheetah. It's marking its territory. If other cheetahs will mark territory in the same region, then there'll be a fight, and then they'll fight, and they'll use resources fighting, and that'll decrease their reproductive fitness because they're spending all their time fighting one another. And those resources over different territories can decrease. Those competition over resources in those given territories can decrease reproductive fitness. Disease transmission rates may also increase. Would also increase with increasing population densities. It happens time and time again. Populations of rodents or other species. Human beings here. This is in Mexico City during the bird flu epidemic a couple of years ago. Everyone was wearing masks to try to prevent themselves from breathing in the bird flu, and it's just diseases. They can wipe you out. They can kill you. They can reduce your reproductive fitness. Diseases pop up in populations that are overpopulated all the time. It's a very naturally occurring cycle. Intrinsic factors like hormonal changes appear to regulate population size, particularly in some rodents. Here's a white-footed mouse. It's in a field enclosure. It basically becomes the more crowded it is in the enclosure, the fewer offspring that it has. So they respond to cues of territoriality and resource competition, and they moderate their own reproductive fitness through physiological cues. The study of population dynamics focuses on complex interactions between biotic and abiotic factors that can cause variation in population size. Long-term population studies have challenged the hypothesis that populations of large mammals are relatively stable over time. Both weather and predator population can affect population over time. For example, the moose population of Isle Royale collapsed during a harsh winter when wolf numbers peaked. So that's an example of a predator-prey interaction That's very popular. Isle Royale is up off in the Lake Michigan, and there's a population of moose and wolves there, and they have a dynamic interaction where when the moose population peaks, the wolf populations will also increase, and when the wolf populations increase, they cause the moose populations to decrease, and that will decrease the wolf populations. So here's the wolves and the mooses. The moose, here's the little wolf population increase, causes a moose population increase, causes a wolf population increase. Wolf population increase causes a moose population decrease. Wolf population decrease causes the moose population increase. Okay, you get the idea. One goes up, the other goes down. Metapopulations are groups of populations linked by immigration and emigration. This is just a new way of measuring populations. Local populations within a metapopulation of occupied patches of suitable habitat surrounded by unsuitable habitat. Populations can be replaced in patches after extinction or established in new local extinction is called extirpation, and it's so populations can be replaced in populations after extirpation and established in new unoccupied habitats through migration. Okay, here are this is a fritillary. It's a type of butterfly, the Glanville fritillary. This is off the coast of Norway. It shows these are metapopulations. These are all populations. The black dots are populations where the fritillary exists, and the white dots are all populations where they have the possibility to exist, but for some reason they're not there. So those are unoccupied patches. So these are all metapopulations in throughout here, and they could exist. So on the Åland Islands, local populations of this butterfly are found in a fraction of suitable habitat patches at any given time. Individuals can move between local populations and colonized unoccupied patches. Okay, here's an exponential growth rate. Make sure you understand what that means. Here's a sigmoidal, a carrying capacity growth rate. Making sure that you understand what that means. Here is here's where your this is where we have our sea otters are eating. Sea otters eat sea urchins, and the cover of seaweed is the cover of seaweed is let's see, it should be where you see more sea otters present. You should see more kelp, more seaweed, because the sea otters are eating the sea urchins, and the sea urchins normally eat the kelp. So here's a high rate of otter sightings, high rate of kelp, low rate of otter sightings, low rate of kelp, because it implied that the sea urchins are here in this population. Okay, so you get the idea of the way the abiotic factors are interacting to create the conditions necessary for populations to thrive or be impacted in different circumstances. Okay, here's yarrow plants. What is that? What are they doing here? The yarrow plants are taller in different areas. Okay, it's true that different species will have different effects, and a lot of times in high elevation areas you'll find dwarfism among certain species. In fact, I was on a hike in Brazil one time, and we found trees at high elevations that were about as tall as your waist. but they were the same species of trees that you found lower on down the mountain. So what this is saying here is these researchers studied how the size of yarrow plants growing on the slopes of a Sierra Nevada varied with elevation. They found that the plants from low elevations were generally taller than the plants from high elevations, as shown below. Okay, well, that's interesting. All right.